Welcome to the Winning with the Losing Hand podcast series. I'm your host, Erwin Scofield. Hello and welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us again for Winning with the Losing Hand. And tonight is take 2. For those of you who attempted to join us on Tuesday, you're well aware of the technical difficulties that we had. And instead of waiting until the next month to bring you the content that I wanted to share with you on tonight, we just simply rescheduled it for Thursday. So if you're back, I want to personally thank you for tuning in to this particular episode. And it is my prayer that you are blessed by what we are going to share here on tonight. So if you don't mind, certainly share this with friends and family, those you know. Paste it on your page so that others can tune in and benefit from this content as well. I do believe that the Lord is going to bless us on tonight as we talk about the subject of being selfless. So do share on your page. Tell your family, your friends to tune in and be with us on tonight. And I believe we all are going to be blessed. So with that, let's enter the lion's den. All right, so we are in the lion's den, and we thank you again for being here. Tonight, we're talking about selfless. And I believe that there is some very good things that we will discover as we explore this topic that will be beneficial to all of us. So I'd like to start off by encouraging you and myself and those who are listening and those who would watch later, that as a goal, we should be striving more and more to be selfless people. On tonight, I'm going to try to delve into that subject by first explaining what it means to be selfish and where the selfish nature came from, and what it means to be selfless and how we achieve that. And on the other side of our intermission, we're going to look at a couple scriptures that encourages us towards selfless living. And we'll look at 5 characteristics of a selfless person. So I do hope that you enjoy all of those. Let me start by saying this, that being selfless or selfless is both an attribute and an action. You can engage in selfless acts without necessarily being a selfless person. So you can engage in selfless acts without necessarily being a selfless person. But you can't be a selfless person, meaning having selfless attributes, without producing selfless acts. I hope that made sense. Let me state that again just to make sure. You can be or you can perform a selfless act without necessarily being a selfless person or having selfless attributes. But you can't have selfless attributes or be a selfless person without producing selfless acts. Okay. And so if we're going to be selfless, it means that we are going to have to learn how to put others before ourselves. And I'm looking forward to us considering this. So it's just me on tonight. There will be no guests on this particular episode. Last month, I wasn't on because I was recovering from the flu and I had to reshuffle my deck. I hope you caught that. This show is called Winning with the Losing Hand, and I have to reshuffle my deck and give our guests an opportunity to prepare to be with us. So they will be with us next month and thereafter as we look at some very wonderful topics that these men are going to help us share with our audience. Well, you just have me tonight, and that's fine because I want to use this platform to explore this topic with you. So, for those of you who don't know, my name is Erwin Scofield, aka the People's Bishop. I'm the pastor of Infusion Church in Harford County, Maryland. I'm the author of Divine Dosages, Encouragement for Enduring Faith, which is available on Amazon. I'm a husband, I'm a father, and I'm a grandfather, and proud of all three. So I want to take us back while we consider the subject of selfless. And I said at the outset, we need to first talk about selfish in order to appreciate what it means to be selfless. And for those of you who are joining, I want to encourage you to be active participants in this session. And one way you can do that is by using your chat area or typing your comments in that we would see. I want you to be able to submit your questions and submit your comments, especially the feedback that you have on the various things that we're saying. And we hope to incorporate some of those in our show. So we do want this to be interactive. Now, this topic of selfless, I said we need to go back and look at selfish and how it originated in order for us to appreciate where we are as far as being selfless. And I want to I'll put up a diagram real quick, a screen that will explain where I'm headed when I talk about the source of selfishness. This one, it really explains how at the center of selfless acts is you and I as individuals. And so I'm going to display for us, I think if I just click it this way, there we go. What we have here is the diagram showing sin on one side and the word it on the other side. I'd like to explain that for the diagram. You would notice that what I did was the I is in lowercase, and that was intentionally set so because I wanted you to see that in both of these words, I is a very prominent part of them. So when we talk about being selfless or selfish, selfish means that I'm focused on me. I'm concerned more about what I want, what I desire. Selfish has a lot to do with satisfying myself, making sure I'm happy, making sure that I have what I want, as opposed to just, what I need. And what you'll notice here is that if I satisfy so satisfying I brings death to me. And you see how I is placed in between the S and the N. So, with that being the case, satisfying I brings death to me, right? So, with that being the case, you see that I was sandwiched in between the S and the N. And that forms the word sin. At the center of sin is I. In fact, there could be no sin without I being at the center of it. Okay. Just so that you can understand that sin is not something that happens to us. Sin is something that we perform. And we want to be very clear about that. So that takes me back to the Garden of Eden just briefly to look at that. In the Garden of Eden, God had given man a command not to eat of the tree that was in the midst of the garden, the tree of the knowledge of the good and evil. They were told not to eat of it. And you know the story how the serpent deceived the woman and she ate of the tree. And the Bible said she gave to her husband who was also with her, and he likewise ate of the tree. So let's talk about sin real quick in that context, right? Because sometimes when we think about sin, I don't know if we paint the picture exactly right. For example, the Bible shows how the serpent deceived the woman and she ate of the tree and then she gave to her husband. But what the Bible doesn't explain to us is the fact that the serpent who tempted the woman, because notice the serpent couldn't make the woman sin, Satan can't make us sin. He doesn't have the power to make us sin. I'm emphasizing that for a reason, okay? But he does have the ability to tempt us so that it will help drive us to or lead us to a sinful act. So there in just in that notion alone, you need to understand that the power to sin rests with the person who is capable of committing the sin. Nobody who tempts us, provokes us, eggs us on, or any of those types of things is responsible for the sin we commit, because while they may be very convincing, we must make the decision. But here's where I want to get to. When I think about Satan deceiving the woman in the garden, that subtle serpent that deceived the woman in the garden, and I ask myself, how did that work? How does it work when a person tempts another person and they commit a sin? How exactly does that work, right? What you have to understand is that sin is the result of selfishness. So sin doesn't produce selfishness. Selfishness produces sin. I don't know if you ever looked at it that way, but if I could just slow myself down and pace myself just to make sure I'm making this clear. The Bible says that the serpent deceived the woman, okay? That she was tempted by the serpent, and as a result of that temptation, she ate of the tree. How does a person experience temptation? Okay. If you are going to be tempted, there first must be a desire pre existing in you in order for temptation to work. You can never be tempted on something you're not interested in. You can never be tempted on something that you don't even want. In order to be tempted, you have to already have a desire for whatever it is that someone is trying to tempt you with, whether that's a dormant desire that you don't realize is seated there, or a known desire that you've been just doing your best to try to avoid. So if we look at that context and that portrait of the Garden of Eden, we can imagine perhaps that Eve had been eyeing that tree and the enemy recognized it. We can probably imagine perhaps that Eve and Adam may have had conversations about that tree. and was doing their best to obey the command to not touch it. But on this particular case, the serpent, the subtle serpent, the deceptive serpent, engaged Eve in conversation and therefore stimulated her desire to the point where she yielded to the temptation. There's a songwriter who says, the hymnologist who says, yield not to temptation, for yielding is sin. It didn't say that temptation is sin. It simply said yielding to temptation is sin. So while temptation may exist, we need to strive to uh, resist the temptation so that the temptation doesn't lead us into sin. Well, the temptation is usually focused around something that we desire. And if I, point your attention back to that, something that we desire means that I have a desire for something. I want something. So there I am again. That is I who's at the center of sin. Sin is always about I, right? So when I desire something I shouldn't desire, okay, I can be tempted by the thing I desire, which would lead me potentially into sin. So sin is when we are positioned in an awkward space between the S and the N. Let me see if I can put that up for you real quick. So there you have the S and the N. When I am sandwiched between these two characters that don't mean me any good, it will lead me into some bad activity. That's why I say satisfying I brings death to me, because the S is sensual, the S is narcissistic. And by sensual, I'm not just talking about sexual, I'm talking about something that excites the senses, that makes us crave and desire things that we probably shouldn't have. When I talk about narcissistic or narcissism, I'm not talking about it in the typical and traditional way that we might speak about those particular things. I'm actually speaking about it from the standpoint that when we strive to accomplish what we want, to pursue what we desire, more so than we do what God desires, we are being, even if in an acute state, some form of narcissistic. So just be mindful of that when I talk about the S and the N in that regard, right? Now, I said, satisfying I brings death to me, because that's what sin does. And the Bible says that the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life. So selfishness motivates me, toward sin. Selfishness makes me vulnerable to temptation. Selfishness makes me easy prey for my adversary to throw me off track and cause me to be misaligned with the will of God for my life. So whenever the I is sandwiched between those two characters that don't mean me any good, the S and the N, I'll find myself caught in what the enemy has cooking for me, right? Now, there's something that needs to shift in me in order for me to escape that first scenario. Let me show you this diagram again. In the second part of this diagram, if you look over to the right, there's the I again, but the I now is situated next to the T in the word it. Now, we are currently in or approaching the resurrection season. And on the resurrection weekend, particularly around Good Friday, we all gathered to listen to the seven sayings from the cross. So many years ago, I wrote concerning the sixth word of the cross, preached it perhaps even in some settings. And I labeled that particular writing the Great Itology. The Great Itology. Very briefly, You got two words there. You got the word it and you got ology. And those of you who know about etymology, you'll know that the ology means the study of. And so we're talking about the study of it, the great etology, the great study of it. Okay. Because in that sixth word, Jesus said, it is finished. So keeping that in mind, let's look at this diagram one more time. And you see that on that second part, you'll see the I is with the T. In this particular case, we're saying that sacrificing I brings life to me, whereas before, satisfying I brings death to me. Again, satisfying I in sin brings death to me. Sacrificing I on the cross brings life to me. That's the key to the great ideology. I gets in trouble when it's hanging around those two characters that don't mean it any good. But when the I removes itself from that bad company and attaches itself to the cross, the I finds new life and eternal life as designed by God. That's why a hymnologist picks it up and says, so I will cherish the old rugged T, the old rugged cross, till my trophies at last I lay down. I will cling to the old rugged cross, the T, and exchange it someday for my crown. Sacrificing I brings life to me. Now, let's see if I can, then tie this together and what we're talking about. So selfishness is about me focusing on myself, on me doing what I desire, what my flesh desires, what I want, and sometimes at whatever cost there is. That's the nature of selfishness. Sin may have exposed more of that selfishness for us, but one thing we can rest assured is that selfishness exists because we focus on ourselves more than we ought to. If we're understanding selfishness, selfishness is a detriment to community because it's about putting oneself first at any cost, right? Sometimes it doesn't matter who gets wounded while we're trying to achieve our objective. Sometimes it doesn't matter who we've got to step on or step over in order to get to where we're trying to get in life. Sometimes it doesn't matter who we will cause to go bankrupt in order for us to gain and profit big. You know, selfishness is about looking at every situation through the lens of WIIFM, what's in it for me, right? Selfishness really focuses on us serving us, and anyone who doesn't serve us and is not us, we may view them as an enemy or at least as our competition. When we are selfish, everyone we associate with that is not us and is not supporting or serving us, they become either competition or they become the enemy. Selfishness doesn't know, understand, comprehend unity. In fact, for a selfish culture, unity is not sustainable. And so, in that way, selfishness is a detriment to any community that it actually exists in. And we know that in this world, there is a whole lot of selfishness. Just about everywhere we turn, everybody or most people have demonstrated or will demonstrate at some point that trait. We want to do the opposite of being selfish. We want to figure out how to be selfless. Not only will we become God pleasing if we are selfless, but some things that are not spoken about often is the underlying joys of being a selfless person. Okay. I hope we can touch on some of those real quick before we go into our intermission break. If we are going to be selfless, it means that we put others first. It also means that we learn to find joy in other people's happiness. It means that we learn how to enrich people with our help, with our support, with our encouragement, with our prayer. It also means that we will promote unity in a community as opposed to the selfish culture where unity is not sustainable in the community. In fact, where selfishness was the detriment to every community it may find itself in, selflessness is the salvation of a community. More people practicing selfless tendencies cause for a community that could be more unified, that could be more harmonious, that could be more considerate, have more empathy, for its neighbor, and a community that can grow together and experience great wins and successes together, that can strive together and achieve great things together. And if we become a selfless people, building and fueling a selfless community, then we can have more harmony in our day-to-day interactions with people and more fruitful results in the outcome of our life. Just thinking about it from that standpoint will help us to realize that when God created Adam and Eve and told them to be fruitful and multiply, he wasn't hoping for them to become or to fuel a selfish society, but rather a selfless society where they can live in harmony and experience all of the joys, the riches, the benefits that God has reserved for them in his creation. So, if we are ever going to get back to the bliss that heaven was intended to be, or the bliss that Eden was intended to be, it will not come by us trying to force our selfish ways. It's only going to come when we learn how to abandon our selfish ways and instead practice more selfless living. Okay. Selfless living has a joy to it that we don't often realize, and that's because we have been raised on selfishness. From the time that we are born, we learn that life is about us, the attention that we get. And then there's the birthdays that we want to know what we're going to get for our birthday. What are we going to get for Christmas? What are we going to get for having a good report card? What are we going to get for this day or that day? We're used to looking at life, developing, growing up with the notion that somebody owes us something. We're expecting something from somebody. Somebody should give us something. And so we are always looking for what we're going to get rather than what we're going to give. And we've learned how to define happiness by what we acquire. So the things we acquire, our acquisitions, is what fuels us to feel and believe that we're happy. But that type of happiness is fleeting. That type of happiness only lasts for a moment. That type of happiness does not last. Remember, satisfying I brings death to me. As I satisfy me, I realize that I'm only happy until my novelty with the thing that I wanted wears off, until I discover that there is something better that I would like to have, until I discover that there is something better than what I have. Those things will cause my joy on the acquisition to be short lived. And now my pursuit is for the latest and greatest, the next best thing, whatever else is out there, which would keep me in a constant pursuit of trying to get happiness through obtaining things that satisfy me. So satisfying I brings death to me. But check this out. If you ever been forced by a parent or a guardian or a mentor to go and volunteer in a place where people are struggling or need help, and you didn't want to do it, you were resisting. I don't feel like doing this. I don't feel like going there. But then you decided that you would do it. And in the process of doing it, you realized that it made you feel good to be a blessing to somebody. What you would have done is tapped into that more dormant side of you that realizes that instead of me achieving happiness by what I get, how about I pursue happiness through what I give? Okay. In other words, being selfless can introduce me to another version of happiness that will elevate my thinking, that would make my heart more pure, that would make me an asset to my community, a benefit and a blessing to those that I associate with. And guess what? I can do all of that without feeling like I'm at loss, right? So, with that said, I want to pursue selfless living because one, it's God pleasing. It's going to please God if I lead a selfless life. But guess what? Two, it's satisfying to the soul when you learn that giving to others can bless you. Um, because we don't practice it often, we usually don't realize it too often. But the more we practice it, the more we realize that that joy is worth pursuing. And we may get to a place where we have money to buy a gift, and where we thought we would buy a gift for us, we thought about somebody and the joy it would bring them if we got a gift for them. And somehow we felt compelled. Let me just forego what I was going to get for me and instead get this gift for someone else. The joy of seeing their happiness and joy when they receive it will be well worth it. That is selflessness. And that helps us to enjoy what God has in store. Now, we have more to say about selflessness, and we're going to cover that on the other side of our intermission. So let's take a break and we'll come back briefly and talk more about being selfless. You're in the Lion's Den, and you're watching Winning with the Losing Hand with yours truly, Erwin Scofield. Consider sharing this live stream to your page so that other men may benefit from what we have to share today. And if you follow us on Facebook or YouTube, you can be notified instantly the moment we go live. How about I get you back to the program? All right, so we're in intermission very briefly, and I just wanted to remind you all that my book, Divine Dosages, is available on Amazon. I'm so excited about it. It's been a blessing so far. Many people have reached out, have made the purchase, and have expressed to me how they've benefited from reading it. And I do appreciate every one of you. I thank you for your support. I thank you for those who bought copies for other individuals and shared it with them. And I thank you for those who have shared the links with other individuals to encourage them to get their copy of the book. And then keep in mind that I am going to be doing a book signing for this very soon. I will get you the date relatively quick, and you would be able to keep up with us on what's happening there. So, yep, Divine Dosages is available, and we encourage you to get your copy on Amazon.com. Now, if you don't get your copy on Amazon.com, but you prefer to get it from me, I keep a supply of it. In fact, I just ordered another shipment of books. So those are available. So thank you for those who have supported. And for those of you who are interested, again, Amazon.com, you will get it in a matter of days, or you can catch me at an upcoming event where you can get a copy of your book. Now, I want to tell you real quick, we are on the 29th, I want to say, of April, of March. It's the Good Friday service, basically. We are going to be at the Northside Baptist Church for Good Friday again this year. I was there for the last year and, of course, the year before that. And the Lord blessed us. For those of you who have uh, gone with us for the Good Friday service, we do invite you to join us again this year. I believe it's going to be a blessing again, but that's at the Northside Baptist Church. And if you follow our pages, you will see graphics announcing it with the address and all of those details. And so we hope you will join us. Obviously, that's going to lead us into the Easter or the Resurrection Sunday. And for those of you who are in the Hartford County area or surrounding areas, we encourage you to come and join us at Infusion Church so that you can experience the blessing of the Lord in our midst, and we can experience the blessing of having you with us. Those announcements are the announcements that we're going to share on tonight. Again, we thank you for tuning in, and we're going to get you back to the program quite shortly. So we'll be back in a few minutes. You're in the Lion's Den, and you're watching Winning with the Losing Hand with yours truly, Erwin Scofield. Consider sharing this live stream to your page so that other men may benefit from what we have to share today. And if you follow us on Facebook or YouTube, you can be notified instantly the moment we go live. How about I get you back to the program? All right, so we're back, and it's time for us to do this last half of this episode. And I truly hope you've been getting something out of this so far. I want to take a minute, and I'm just scrolling through some of the comments. So I thank you for being on. It seems like some of you have expressed that you've enjoyed it. David Watts, thank you, sir, for your comments there. We want to encourage you, if you have any questions, to feel free to submit your questions to us, and we will do our best to answer. If something we said or shared did not sound like or didn't make sense to you, certainly put it in your comments so that we can cover that for you as well. All right, so now having said that, let's go back to where we were talking. So we ended making a brief introduction to being selfless. And we want to pick up there as we, sail through this second half. Being selfless is God-pleasing. In fact, Jesus demonstrates selfless living. In fact, we're instructed toward selfless living. We really don't even have to get deep and biblical to understand the benefits of selfless living. The joy that we innately feel when we help people should tell us that we were meant to do this. We were meant to help others rather than just try to satisfy ourselves. I'm just going to repeat it again. Satisfying I brings death to me. But sacrificing I brings life to me. When I learn how to be a person who sacrifice for others, I experience a joy I didn't know when I was leading my selfish life. Okay. God isn't pleased with our selfishness, but he is pleased with our selflessness. And being selfless is not a punishment. It's a joy for people who understand how to actually apply it correctly. I want to share with you 3 scriptures real quick about selfless living. At least these scriptures allude to the benefit of selfless living. So I'm going to first share with you a scripture, and let me take this to Philippians, I believe. Philippians, the 2nd chapter. I'll read the 3rd and the 4th verse, but we have posted on the screen a portion of the 3rd verse where it says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. So, in this particular verse, we are encouraged that we shouldn't do anything out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Now, just so that you can appreciate this, the context of this particular verse is where the Bible talked about how Jesus had sacrificed to come and be our sacrificial lamb. How, he thought it not robbery to be equal with God, but yet he humbled himself and took on the form of his own creation, the form of a servant, so that he could come and die for our sin, right? So he, the one who's demonstrating this selfless act, is telling us through Paul's writings, don't do anything for selfish ambition or vain conceit. Our selfish goals, our selfish ambition does not please God. Unfortunately, today, we have a lot of people who are just trying to be important. And we're not just talking about people in the world or unsaved or unchurched people who are trying to be important. We have people even in the church who are trying to be important, sometimes to a fault, because we don't realize that our crave for greatness, our crave for significance and importance, our crave for status, power, titles, and all of those things, our crave for honor, uh, all it does is it fans the flames of our selfishness. We find ourselves then becoming competitive with others in the kingdom as opposed to working together. In fact, the reason why some can't work together is we're so busy competing with one another. Those are traits of selfishness. Those are traits of the I being sandwiched between the S and the M. So the Bible tells us that's not the way. We shouldn't do anything for selfish ambition or vain conceit. However, we should, in humility, value others above ourselves and not look to our own interests, but look to the interests of others. Let's see how we can serve other people. Let's see how we can bless other people. Let's see how we can help other people. Because if we're focusing on us, our ministry, our success, our crowd, our audience, our church, our membership roster, our home, our car, if we're focusing there, we're practicing the selfish mentality, and that means that we're falling short of being able to be God pleasing. So selfless living is encouraged by Jesus's example and followed up with Paul's words to the church at Philippi saying, don't do anything out of selfish ambition or for vain glory. Okay, let's look at another verse real quick. And that verse says, whosoever desires to become great among you, let him be your servant. Now, this is going to come from Matthew chapter 20. The verses are 25 through 28. It reads like this. But Jesus called them to himself and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who are great exercise authority over them. Yet it shall not be so among you. But whoever desires to be great or become great among you, let him be your servant. And whoever desires to be first among you, let him be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. So in this particular case, God is again through the scriptures here, Jesus is actually talking in this case, giving us a clarification on what greatness truly is. Greatness is not lording it over someone, is not exercising your authority over someone, is not projecting your image, to be celebrated in the midst of people. It's not you claiming and clamoring for their attention, their accolades, or them serving you in a certain way. But greatness according to God is when we humble ourselves to serve others, when we recognize that we're here to serve rather than to be served, right? He says, for the Son of Man didn't come to be served, but rather to serve. And he says to his disciples, I want you to learn how to be the same way. Well, the only way we're going to do that is if we practice selfless living. And selfless living will take us a long way. Okay. Let's see. I saw somebody said, I thought I had a question, but I think I answered it trying to figure out how to word it. Basically, the thought is that even being selfless can be selfish if the intention is only to gratify yourself. Would that be correct? And that is absolutely correct. I could almost go into a form of covert narcissism, to describe how sometimes what looks like is in the best interest of other people is really to achieve the goal of satisfying the person who wants to appear to be generous to other people. In fact, even the Bible tell us in Corinthians, the love chapter, the 13th chapter of Corinthians, where it says, though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, though I give my body to be burned, yet if I don't have love, I'm nothing. I'm a sounding brass and tinkling cymbal. So think about that. These traits of bestow my goods to feed the poor, give my body to be burned, all of that screams as a person who is selfless, when in actuality, there is a motive behind what appears to be selfless, which makes selflessness in that case a counterfeit. It's a selfless mask on a selfish motive. I'll say that again. It is a selfless mask on a selfish motive. And we've got to avoid that. So, very good question. And it looks like you did answer your own question, sir. So, I hope that added some, context to that. So, we're encouraged that if we want to be great, we've got to go the route of putting people before us. Right. That's why God says, I will give you pastors after my own heart who will feed you with knowledge and understanding. It's because he had to breed a type of leader who should learn that it's about the sheep, it's about the people, it's about those that God has entrusted, and that as a gift to the people, that the people are more important in terms of God's objective. So it's more important to God that the sheep get fed than it is that the preacher is happy. I hope I said that right, or that the preacher is comfortable. That doesn't mean that the preacher shouldn't be happy or comfortable, but it's more important to God that the sheep get fed than it is for the pastor to be comfortable. And so when we understand that this is in line with what he says, that we are not to lord it over folk. I am the pastor, so celebrate me. But instead, we are to serve, just as Christ said he came to serve and to not be served. So I hope that, kind of helped with context as well. Thank you for your question, sir. If anybody else has questions, feel free to share them, while we're here. The third verse I'm going to share with you comes out of Galatians. And that passage is Galatians, the 5th chapter, verses 13 through 15. The verse itself, I believe, comes out of the 15th verse. And here's what it says. For you, brethren, have been called to liberty. Only do not use liberty as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love, serve one another. Through love, serve one another. And then it says this, for all the law is fulfilled in one word, even this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Now watch this. But if you bite and devour one another, beware lest you be consumed by one another. If you bite and devour one another, beware lest you be consumed by one another. Let's think about that for a second. When you are selfish, you are scrambling for all you can get. And no matter how much you get, you never have enough. And so you will bite and devour each other to get your share and beyond as much as you can handle. It's their fault if they can't get as much as you. It's their fault if they're not as hungry as you. It's their fault if they don't put forth as much effort as you. I'm going to get all I can get because that's my opportunity. That's the world system. That's not God's system. And yet here God is saying through his servant, if you bite and devour one another, even in the commission of trying to get ahead, trying to achieve something, trying to obtain success, beware lest you be consumed by one another, meaning somebody is going to come for you just as demonstrated that type of selfish pursuit elsewhere. And this trait is not something that God has. That's why he says we have a liberty, but don't use it as an occasion for the flesh. Don't use it to satisfy yourself. Remember, satisfying I brings death to me. Sacrificing I brings life to me. And these scriptures seem to be reinforcing that concept as we go. So I hope you would be encouraged that we would focus on selfless living so that we can be God pleasing in the sight of God. Now I got to move real quickly. I'm down to my last 10 minutes. I'll call it 8 minutes, so that we can actually end without a final credits. But I'm going to take you into a segment, the final segment that we're going to talk about. And this is 5 ways to live selfless. 5 ways to live selfless. And those 5 ways to live selfless basically. Oh, let's see. Yeah, thank you. So by me moving that in the screen, you couldn't hear me. Sorry about that. But those 5 ways is practicing humility, serving others, putting others first, practicing generosity, and forgiving others. Let's dive into that real quick and understand these attributes before we close out for tonight. 5 ways to live selfless. If you made a commitment to try at least one, it will greatly enhance your life. If you gradually add one to the one you try, you will constantly be growing until you become a value to your community and an asset in the kingdom of God, and certainly one who could look forward to one day hearing the Lord say, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." First, practicing humility. We've got to cultivate a humble attitude because that's a key to living a selfless life. A humble attitude. We got to recognize that we are all equal in the sight of God. We may have different roles and responsibilities, but roles and responsibilities does not look like status to God. These are various jobs and responsibilities that we have to perform. And the person who sweeps a floor in the name of Christ gets the same reward as a person who preaches the gospel in the name of Christ if they do it diligently with humility. So while it may look to us as if one task in the kingdom may be superior than another task in the kingdom, from God's vantage point, they all look the same if a person performs their task with a humble heart. So, a humble facilities manager is worth more than an arrogant preacher. Okay. Just keeping in mind, humility is the key to a selfless living, because in order for you to practice selfless living, you're going to have to learn how to say no to you. You're going to have to learn how to say no to your desires. You're going to have to learn how to exalt other people instead of exalting yourself. And it takes humility to do that. So keep that in mind, right? The second thing is serving others. We have to actively look for opportunities to serve and help those who have a need, help them in practical ways so that they can accomplish, what they need to. And if we do that, we're practicing selflessness. Serving others is selfless. Okay. Now keep in mind, this goes back to something that was said earlier. Let's make sure that we understand that everything is qualified by the motive. So if you're serving others so that you can get them to do something for you, your motive just defiled your selfless act and caused you to be, borrowing from my example before, a person who's wearing a selfless mask on top of a selfish motive, right? So serving others purely for their benefit, for their success, for their deliverance, for their positive outcome is selfless living. Putting others first. We talked about serving, and now this is putting others first. Putting others first basically means that you want to make sure that you prioritize the need of other people and their needs and well-being above yourself. We're not really taught to do that much. We're taught, to take care of your stuff first and then you worry about other people's stuff. And there are some scenarios where that might make sense. But generally speaking, if we care about other people and put them first, we're practicing selfless living. Give you an example of that. Putting people first doesn't always mean that they go first. Putting someone first doesn't always mean that they go first. Here's the analogy. If I'm entering into a place where we've never been before, I might want to go in ahead of my wife because that's unfamiliar territory. And me going ahead is more like reconnaissance, where I am looking out and scoping out the place to make sure it's safe for her. So I went first because I put her first. Okay. It was for her safety and protection that I went first. Right now, conversely speaking, if where we are running from was dangerous and where we're going to is safe, I don't want to go through that door first because I want to make sure she's safe. So when we say put others first, don't assume that it means that they have to go first. But do know that it means that if you go first, putting other people first, it's because it is for their benefit and protection that you went first. Okay. So let's not conflate what putting others first mean, but it's making that conscious effort to make sure that their needs are prioritized over your needs when you are practicing selfless living. If you're practicing selfish living, it's going to be a whole different scenario. But that's not what Christ is teaching us. Christ is teaching us and admonishing us toward selfless living. Okay. Number 4, practicing generosity is selfless. Being generous with our time, with our talents, and with our resources is another way that we lead a selfless life. Being able to donate to worthy causes as we can, to support those who are worse off than we are, is another way of practicing selfless living. In fact, if you really want to understand the beauty of it, selfless living is being able to recognize, number one, that even though you know that there are some things that you want to achieve or acquire for yourself, there are other folk who are worse off than you. And instead of always pursuing the next thing you want to achieve for yourself, also consider what can you do to help folk who don't quite have what you have to be a little better off than they were. So practicing generosity, and generosity comes in multiple forms. As we said, it comes in your time, You can be generous with your time. Your time is a valuable commodity. And when you give it, it's not a cheap thing. And of course, you don't want to give your time to anyone who wastes it. So being generous with your time does not mean allowing people to waste your time. Being generous with your time does not mean giving your time to every cause that might not be a worthy cause. But being generous with your time is to make sure that you're giving it to that good cause for the benefit of helping others in a selfless manner, right? Finally, forgiving others is another way that we practice selfless living. Okay. To not forgive others is like a weird form of selfishness, to be honest. It's even a covert narcissism, whereas covert narcissism, a person can play the victim role. And even though it seems like they're, downtrodden in their spirit and what have you, but the fact that they're focusing on them and their feelings, even though they're feeling lowly, is a form of covert narcissism. In other words, everybody, woe is me, everybody's against me. And no matter what a person says to encourage you, you want to harp on the fact that your life is miserable. That's a form of covert narcissism. So the point there being is we've got to learn how to forgive people, because sometimes we can put ourselves in that victim category and feel like somebody is doing something against us. And because they did this against us, I am going to never forget it. I am going to never let it go. I'm just going to hold on to this. Or, I'll forgive you, but I will never forget what happened. So I'm going to forgive you. You're free, but I'm going to stay bound bound because I choose not to forget. People don't realize that if you can't forget when you forgive, then you are still trapped in that same effort by which you thought forgiveness was going to free you. Where you say, well, you forgive folk because that's going to free you. But yet you are not willing to forget, which means that you're still bound by that thing, forcing yourself to rehash it, forcing yourself to recall it so that you won't experience what forgiveness truly should be. These are 5 traits of selfless living. I wish I had time to, delve a little more into it, but my time is up. I see that it is 8:00. Again, I want to thank you for tuning in with us. I want you to know that next month we will be back with our guests diving into topics. But in the meantime, I hope that this intimate time we shared, with me sharing with you on this topic, has been of some sort of blessing or encouragement to you. I encourage you to submit your comments, your feedback, your questions, and any types of comments that you want to share will certainly be welcome. And I thank you. If you have been with us on Tuesday when we had our technical difficulties and decided to come back today, I appreciate you for being back with us today. And I hope you will be back with us next month as we go through another phase of our Winning with the Losing Hand podcast. God bless you all, and may you have a good evening. Thank you for joining us here today. And please meet us here every third Tuesday of the month at 7:00 p.m. We're excited about the upcoming episodes and the wonderful guests who will join us to be a blessing to you and your family.